What is up, everybody? Welcome into this Saturday episode of Flippin Bats. Saturday with Smoltz. Always a blast to talk to the Hall of Famer for the Atlanta Braves, John Smoltz. This week, I am pumped for you all to hear these conversations we're going to have. Within the last week, we've seen a college pitcher throw 156 pitches in a game. Talked to John Smoltz about this, and it led to one of the best conversations I think we've ever had about pitchers getting Tommy John more in this day and age, whether it's okay for pitchers to throw that many pitches, why they're getting so much Tommy John surgeries, what to do about it, if it was okay for him to throw that many pitches. It really is such an awesome conversation and one that he is really, really passionate about. So really cool to talk to him about that, as well as talking about the Baltimore Orioles. What are the Orioles going to do at the deadline? Can they jump the Yankees? Can they beat the Yankees and the Blue Jays in the division? And even could they possibly pass the Tampa Bay Rays? And lastly, what we saw in the Stanford, Texas College World Series final was a walk-off to go to the College World Series on a lost pop fly in the outfield. So I asked John Smoltz the craziest ending to a game that he was ever a part of. This one is going to be a blast. Without further ado, here is Hall of Famer John Smoltz.
It's a blowout, 8th inning, 10-3. Bases are loaded for Verlander, who waits on a 3-0 pitch. He swings, and it's a high fly ball, deep center field. It is gone! Home run! And a huge bat flip to celebrate. All right, Ben, start the show already.
All right, I am pumped to welcome in, as always, John Smoltz. John, how you doing this week, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing great. U.S. Open week. Perfect week.
It's out here at LACC. So I've seen some video. The rough is apparently like insane. Yeah. There's that 280-yard par 3. It's gonna be a wild weekend for sure. Have you played LACC?
I have. It's one of my favorite courses. Last year played it, and they were getting the rough ready for the Open last year. That just tells you what you need to know. And I don't know if I don't know if anyone can. I don't know. These guys are the greatest. They probably always surprise you, but I think 2 under to 4 under is going to be the winning score.
Yeah. John, we got to talk about last week. You were a part of a legendary broadcast booth with the Braves. It was yourself, Tom Glavine, Chipper Jones, and Jeff Francoeur. And it just looked like so much fun. First off, I mean, how much fun did you have that night?
Yeah, I had a lot of fun. You know, I do the Saturday games for Fox as well, and it's a straight, you got to play it by the, you just can't, when you're doing a national game, you're bringing in people from out of town that aren't their local broadcasts. So there's certain things you just can't do. I like to have a good time. I don't mind laughing. And this was very unique. We had a lot of history together. And we had a lot of history against the Mets, and it was an epic game that we thought was going to be a low-scoring game that did not turn into a low-scoring game. So it actually gave us more time to talk about things. We didn't think we'd have a lot of time. We realized that play-by-plays are super important because we didn't have a play-by-play announcer. We had to do our own calls, which is not something we're used to.
What would you say are some of your favorite moments from that night?
There were a lot. My favorite moments is just seeing the guys when it was their turn to call the homer, right? Like Jeff Francoeur was copycatting announcers on his home run call, and I got him a little nervous when I told him he has to do his own. And then Chipper copied a couple, and then all of a sudden, you know, it's a little different when you have to figure something else on the fly. I just laughed at a lot of different my favorite moment was probably the moment that we showed the video of Chipper running over Greg Maddux. That's history. I mean, that's one of the funniest things. You never see that happen. It was his first time in the big leagues. I can't even tell you how mad Greg Maddux was, just standing in the middle of the field and then all of a sudden getting run over by your own player. Luckily he didn't get hurt, but there was a lot of fun. And at the same time, you know, we understand the time we had together was unique, and this current time is unique too. So getting a chance to talk about that to the fans, I know they enjoyed it locally. I don't think it went well in New York, but I think everybody ultimately understands the purpose of it, and it was a lot of fun.
What does Chipper, because you and I have talked about that moment before where he ran over Greg Maddux. What does Chipper say about that moment?
I can't imagine how, well, first of all, Maddox had a lot of choice words for Chipper. So he just kind of went back to third base and mind his P's and Q's. It's one of the funniest things. He was so eager to try and catch that pop up, he lost all sight of Maddox. And, that's the eager version. Obviously, Chipper played a long time and an iconic Brave. So it was fun to relive some of those memories, laugh at ourselves. And along the way, it was just a great baseball game. I mean, it was one of those games you just don't get very often.
So you guys were pretty much alternating every inning. If there was a home run in that inning, it would alternate which one of you was calling it. You got the walk-off homer. Did you plan that call, or did it just come to you?
No, I didn't want to tell Jeff how nervous I was. So I kind of didn't speak much in that 10th inning because I didn't want to think about trying to say something. I just wanted to react. I don't know why those words came to my head.
Start the buses.
The home run, the home run was hit so fast. I just, all I could think of was, well, that'll do it. And then what do you say after that? I don't even know why I said start the buses, but Francoeur had a great line afterwards. It's now a T-shirt, I think, in Atlanta. Pour Larry a crown. Yeah. It's time to eat. And it just, again, it's one of those things you can't do a lot. It's a good change of pace.
Yeah.
And there'll probably be one more game that'll be like that. And that being local, you could do more things. Nationally, you could probably never probably never pull that off.
You talked about the game. The game was wild. One of the crazier games of the season. Justin against Spencer Strider, two of the best pitchers in baseball. Neither of them pitching, I think, what we would have expected of them so far in the season. What are you seeing from those two guys, specifically in that game? What did you see from those pitchers that made this such a, it's 13-10 final. Neither pitcher threw well at all. What did you see from those guys?
Well, the Mets have a great approach against Strider. They did this 2 games in a row. Strider throws a lot of strikes, and he comes after you with fastballs, but they don't strike out a lot, fouled off a lot of pitches. And I thought they had a great game plan. And against Justin, his curveball probably wasn't as sharp, and you're just missing a little tick on that slider because the one thing about these two pitchers that if you're hitters, you're in for a battle. You're not going to take any at bat for granted. And they're going to throw strikes. So if you get a mistake, you got to hit it. And there were a few mistakes played that just kind of snowballed. And the ball seemed to be jumping that night. And look, a lot of anticipation. When you go into those games, you try to think about winning 2-0, 2-1. You never envision that the first inning was going to be 4 or 3 or whatever, how many runs the Braves scored. And then here comes the Mets putting a bunch of runs on the board. And you think, oh, shoot, you're not going to get Justin now. The first inning. We showed our collective ERAs in the first inning. That was way higher than I ever thought, by the way, that I thought I had a better ERA in the first inning career-wise. But that's usually what happens to pitchers. You're going to get them. You get them in the first inning. And certainly the game didn't live up to the hype, unfortunately, for us as pitchers. We would have loved to have seen that 2-1, probably 24 strikeouts between the two of them.
Yeah, for you as pitcher and me as brother, it did not it did not go exactly the way we wanted it. John, over in the American League, the Orioles have been since last year, after they brought up Adley Rutschman throughout the rest of the season, they were one of the better teams in the game of baseball. This season, one of the better teams in the game of baseball. What do you see from the Baltimore Orioles that makes them such a good baseball team?
I see a similarity that we had in 1990 in the second half when we started believing we could win. And in 1991, of course, the miracle happens. We chased down the Dodgers and the Reds. By no means were we in the kind of division that the Baltimore Orioles are in, where it's just from top to bottom that good. But they have a belief system. They're young, they're energetic, they play within the rules of the game, meaning the new rules kind of advantageous for them. They hit, they run, and they pitch in the back end about as good as anybody. So, look, the Baltimore Orioles have been kind of the doormat of the AL East for a long time, and they no longer feel like that's part of their DNA. And there's a lot to say for that organization having the patience, having the time, probably way too long, and now they're relevant again, and that's great. So now they have the opportunity to do some things within their farm system. I'm not a big fan of thinking that the playoffs are going to come around every year. So if you've got a chance to maximize it and you feel like you can make a deep run, then you go out and do some things. So I think they're at that point.
Certainly, you mentioned their patience. I think a lot of Orioles fans would say maybe too much patience in the last half year to a year. Last year at the trade deadline, they were sellers, which I think at the time it's turned out really well because they ended up getting Yennier Cano out of that deal. But I think it surprised a lot of people that they got rid of Jorge Lopez, Trey Mancini, those names. This year, that ain't going to fly anymore. The fan base would riot if they were sellers here. And I don't think they will be, but you don't know how aggressive they will be, but what would you like to see them add at the trade deadline?
And that's the point that we've been in the narrative in baseball that doesn't work. It sounds good on paper. You hear this narrative all the time. Give us 7 years and we'll build us a championship. Or here's our window of opportunity. There's no guarantees in that.
Yep.
And if you're ahead of the schedule, unless you can't finish the season with starting pitching, meaning you're too young, you need to go out and make a move that changes the franchise and the fan base to say, hey, we're in this for not 1 year, but the next 3 to 4 years. And I think that's the move you got to make. You got to get somebody under control that you can keep, that you will transform that into a 3-year run versus, all right, we're not quite ready yet. We're going to wait 1 more year. That's the goal of every player on every team, is to put pressure on their general manager and their management come All-Star break to be forced to think about making trades that will impact their team for that year to finish it out. I'll give you another example in the National League. The Cincinnati Reds may not be ready for that, so they may be one of those diversions that the Baltimore Orioles were last year, where there is a couple more pieces they could build, but their future is pretty bright, and they've got a chance to do some things that, again, both of them they haven't been relevant, and baseball has to get away from, in my opinion, this 7-year plan.
Yep.
It's just, it doesn't work. You use the Cubs as an example, but how many other teams can you talk about other than Houston and the Cubs? Houston's a totally different thing, by the way. They had to change leagues and rosters. It's not the same as the Cubs, building this to get this championship. So it's tough that if you can convince your fan base that you can wait 7 years, which I don't believe any fan base buys.
Yeah.
If you get to a point where you've got a chance for that, proverbial window of 3 to 5 years based on a small market team, I think you got to maximize it.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I think the Orioles are currently in the midst. I think that window has just started to open. I think they're there. I think it's time to go all in for this team, and I don't know what will be out there at the deadline. I don't think anybody knows fully what will be out there, but I would really like to see them add and go for it. Do you believe this Orioles team is good enough to finish the season, let's say, ahead of the Yankees or the Blue Jays? The Rays are going to be really hard to win the division against, but do you think the Orioles could finish this in second place in the AL East?
I really do. I think the playoff spots are going to come out of the East. I think that they know that if you slot yourself in that position and you can chase down, let's just say there's 2.5 weeks left. Then you're probably not going to chase the Rays and you're just going for positioning in the playoffs. But given the fact that there's so much time left and the Rays have been off to a historic start and you never know how the injuries are going to play, I don't think it's out of the question that they can't compete for a division title if you believe that the Rays can't sustain this kind of pace. And I think, again, the schedule is going to dictate a lot. Teams that are not very good right now are going to be looking to sell off whatever pieces they have to continue to build for the future. It's the nature of the game. And I think you're going to see some surprise trades with control, meaning the highest leverage trade you can make is meaning the team that gets this player is going to have at least two more years to hold on to that player. That's where you get the value. The 1 year kind of just dump a player, nice ad, but not a difference maker. Those deals aren't going to make as big of a splash. And so I think look for a couple teams to kind of cherry pick teams that were supposed to win, that didn't, and are now looking to go in a different direction.
Similar to the Juan Soto trade, where he was still under control for a couple of years for the Padres after that midseason trade. John, I know we don't talk a ton about college baseball, as in I don't think you and I have ever talked about college baseball, but this is more of a baseball in general question. Over the weekend, a pitcher for Stanford, Quinn Matthews, in a super regional game, threw 156 pitches. Now, just a bit of a backstory here. This guy was drafted before, wanted to go back to school to get his team to Omaha, didn't feel like he was valued enough in the draft. So his goal is to get back, get to Omaha, threw 156 pitches in a complete game, 16 strikeouts, and it became quite the conversation, as you can imagine, because of the high pitch count. What are your thoughts on throwing 156 pitches in a game?
Every game and every pitch count is not relevant. It's not equal. There's no magic pitch count. I'll just take you to the big leagues. All these smart people, how have they stopped the injuries and we have this so-called pitch count of 100 pitches? It's not working. They don't really care. That's not an issue anymore. You got to take each in a vacuum and look, is a guy stressed? Is he max efforting? Is these things, because if you just threw in a non-competitive and stress-free environment, every pitcher could throw 140 pitches, but not every pitcher can throw 140 max effort pitches. Some pitchers can't even throw 75 max effort pitches. The pitch count has become a ridiculous statement that we all buy into. It's because somebody decided that was a narrative that was going to be a baseline for preventing injuries. It doesn't work. It never will work because not everybody's the same. I'll argue this with whoever wants to argue with me because you've got to look at it differently. You could throw 141 game and then the next game throw 90 or the next game throw. It's a mindset. It's a trainability, but it's not an injury preventer. And I guarantee you the narrative's going to be, this guy's going to get hurt. He could have got hurt at 55 pitches. I think the one thing that we've lost, pitch counts were all designed to show a pitcher how they could be economical with the amount of pitches to get more outs. That's the reality. It was told to a pitcher way back when, hey, get more outs, less pitches, you go deeper. Now that's not the narrative. It's give me everything you have as much as you can. And if you only go 4, so be it. We got the next guy to take care of it. It is really I won't go very strong to say a joke, but it's funny how we just stick something out there and then everybody kind of goes, oh no, he's at 105. Why is he still in the game? These things have been blown out of proportion for so long that you should ask every pitcher for the last 50 years why the pitch count, you get the same answer. It is absolutely not relevant. Now, 186 pitches in one game, maybe a little much. Nolan Ryan, all these people. We just kind of think that the ones that did it before were freakish. No, it's all relative. And so, yes, 156 in today's day is going to blow, Twitter open in the baseball world to say, oh, what are they doing? Now, I didn't watch the game. I didn't see how many stress level game situation he had. But the narrative to just say 105 pitches is the max anyone should throw is putting everybody in the same cookie cutter box, and that's not the same.
John, I completely agree with you, and that was my take and stance on all this as well. And hearing you talk, let me ask you this question because it is a fact. Back, especially when you first came into the league, starting pitchers threw many more pitches on average than starting pitchers do currently. Nolan Ryan, obviously up there, not exactly the same time frame, but early in your career, again, still starting pitchers were way up there. Would you say that there were more pitchers getting Tommy John surgery when you were playing at the beginning of your career or now with pitch counts? Oh, you can't go over 100.
Not even close. It's now. I mean, kids are getting it at 13, 12, 10. It is an epidemic that we don't pay attention to and no one talks about. All they've done is said, a guy's going to have Tommy John over the course of his career. Let's deal with it, move on, and go to the next one. And I don't think this is a good option when you have all these factory and great arms that you're just burning and churning. And I think I saw a stat somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of every pitcher in the big leagues, something crazy, has had Tommy John. That's where we're going. And I think people forget that most of the guys that had it in my era was a longevity thing. I had it at 2,400 innings after 14 years. But we've talked about this. More of my stress came in the postseason of 14 straight years.
Yep.
Throw 200 innings in the postseason when you're at the end of your rope in the year. So, look, no one's paying attention. And I promise you this. They will pay attention when pitching runs out. And most people will say, hey, pitching's not going to run out because look at the factory of arms that they're creating. And it's only for short stints. So I'm passionate about this because I spoke about it at my Hall of Fame, and I don't want to see pitchers have short careers. I just don't. I don't care how much money they make. I don't want to see them have short careers. I want to see them pitch for 15, 18, 20 years. It's a great game. But at the rate we're going, there's no chance that the average pitcher's career is going to come close to what we got a chance to do. And I get it. The philosophy's different. The reward system's different. But I still doesn't take away the fact that I'd like to see him pitch longer.
Do you have an answer? I mean, I don't think is the answer just pitchers need to get back to throwing more. But like, what is the answer to pitchers' careers not being as long right now?
Well, when you're training to throw as hard as you can and spin it as hard as you can, there's not a body mechanism. Yeah. You're talking about freaks that can last that. It's just not possible for the body to do this. No one's listening to the great Dr. Andrews or any other doctor that's talking about the danger of, I call it redline pitching. You know, I've shared this with you. You got a tachometer on your car as a red line. Your engine will not work if you stay in the red line and you continue to drive it like that. And I think baseball and organizations are okay with the fact that they know a pitcher might go 4 or 5 innings with the freak that you get less than 5% of the pitchers in the game that are going to have 10 plus career years that aren't morphed into the Kershaw era, Verlander, and, you know, Max Scherzer. We're talking now, last 10 years on up. Let's track some of the pitchers and see how long they last. We already got DeGrom getting his second Tommy John. We've already had a number of guys have Tommy John. To me, it's a controllable, trainable act. If baseball wants to put emphasis on having a pitcher pitch longer for them, let's just say you draft him and you want him to start 6 years, you can't ask him to max effort every pitch because of a computer printout. These guys can pitch at 95 miles an hour. They don't have to be at 99 to 100. But that's what's driving it. So if you're going to get rewarded and drafted and play in the game, you must throw the ball hard. And you must get the velocity up past 97. That's what's working, and that's what the temporary, philosophy that has lived in baseball. I know it's a Pandora's box. I've been on both sides, but I also know that pitchers could stay healthier, but nobody wants to talk about that anymore because of what I just said.
I think a good example here is Justin, who has had a very long career, obviously, but people all the time have said, why does your brother come out throwing 92 in the first inning? And then, well, what do you know, by the 7th, 8th, 9th, especially early in his career when he needs that big out, runners on second and third in the 8th inning in a 1-run ball game, all right, he'll bump it up to, at the time, 100, 101, 102, but, he would pitch 92 to 94 until he had to adjust.
That's exactly right. That's why I labeled him a 10-speed bike. He's got 10 gears. Now, granted, not everyone has 10 gears, but I promise you this. He had to learn how to pitch. He had to learn how to pitch before he had to be max effort and throw 99. Now, when you combine the velocity we have in the game where they've not been taught to hit one spot or another, they've been taught to throw it through this huge box and throw it as hard as they can and just mix and match with stuff. When they lose velocity, they don't have the ability to go in another direction. They only know one way. And so if you trained a guy to be 94, 95, and by the way, you can do that. It's a mindset and it's a philosophy that would work. But now when a guy gives up runs in the first inning, that organization says, we want you coming out of the gate revving. Yeah. We want you revving the engines. We don't want you setting up a hitter for the third time. We want you to pitch till you can't pitch no more, and the next guy will do that. So that mantra has taken over, and that's why you're not going to see anybody have that kind of Justin Verlander. I've been saying from the mountaintops, if you want to watch a young pitcher, or if you're a young pitcher, you should watch Justin Verlander. You should model your career after him. You should want to be that guy that takes the ball and does what he does. But you might be fighting your own club's philosophy, and you may not get that chance. So that's the rub.
Yeah. John, last one for you before we go. That series that I was just talking about in college, Texas versus Stanford, that series ended. The Super Regional ended. Stanford is going to the College World Series because the game ended on a walk-off fly ball that nobody saw. They lost it in the sky. Ball drops with 2 outs and extra innings. Game over. That's how it ended. It was wild. But my question to you would be, when you look back on your career, what is the wildest or craziest ending to a game that you can remember?
Wow, that's a good question. I mean, that's a heartbreaker there. That's because when the ball's hit, that's an out, and it's unfortunate they couldn't find it. I've seen games end on a balk. That's a tough way. The pitcher dropped the ball on the mound with a runner on third and 2 outs. Yeah. Doesn't get much worse than that for a pitcher. But anytime you lose in a and lose in a routine play,
Yeah.
that your heart breaks for the guy. But I'd say the balk, because if you think about it, no play happened. He just dropped the ball, and you can't drop the ball when you're on the mound, especially with a runner on third.
John, always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next week, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, just wanted to thank again John Smoltz for every single week joining me here on Saturday with Smoltz. Always a blast. What a great conversation today with him about pitchers. It really is fascinating. In this day and age, we're seeing so many more Tommy John surgeries, yet somebody throws 156 pitches and we feel like the world is ending because it's so detrimental to his arm. Yet back in the day, pitchers used to throw tons of pitches and there weren't near as many Tommy John surgeries. So what is the answer? Well, I don't really know, and I don't know if John Smoltz knows the answer to getting pitchers to dial it back maybe a little bit and pitch more in that 94, 95 range instead of 100 if you feel like you have 100 in you. But really a fascinating conversation. I always love having Smoltz on. I grew up a huge Atlanta Braves fan, and he was one of my favorite players on the team. So really cool, as always, to be able to talk with him. That has been John Smoltz on Saturday with Smoltz. Alex and I are currently down in San Diego this weekend, the Padres and Rays series, talking to a bunch of players. Live post-game shows. We did one Friday. We're doing one tonight. Saturday night, there will be a live post-game show down on the field there and getting tons of fun video and stuff throughout the whole process. So make sure you're following us on social media so you don't miss anything. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and you can watch everything on YouTube at Flippin Bats Pod for all of them. Also, make sure you're subscribed anywhere you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify, wherever. But until tonight's live post-game show, this has been another episode of Flippin Bats.